1940. At the end of a year of war, the people of the British Isles stand on guard against the invader from the continent of Europe. Almost overnight, the British people become a nation of roof spotters, auxiliary police, air raid wardens, and firefighters. Day and night, they watch for the coming of the enemy. This is the most dangerous invasion threat that Britain has ever faced. The German armies, flushed with their victories in Western Europe, hold the coastline from Narvik to Bordeaux. The whole mass of Nazi-occupied Europe, its bases and industry and resources, is pitted directly against the island. The way seems clear for the knockout blow against Britain. Across the Straits of Dover, German troops take their stand. Along the French coast, they mount big guns and prepare for invasion. Hitler promises his people that he will dictate peace terms in London by mid-September. In August, the attack begins. After 2 months of intense preparation, the Nazi Air Force takes off from its bases in France. Its job is to destroy British airfields, cripple the RAF, and prepare the way for the landing parties. In seemingly endless numbers, the bombers with their fighter escorts head toward the English coast. Along the cliffs of England, the listening posts are waiting for them. And before they are over the fields of Kent, the anti-aircraft batteries are ready. Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Defiance of the RAF rise to the attack, and in the skies of southern England they meet the Germans in the first great air battle of history. Streaking down upon the foes, the Spitfires and Hurricanes do terrible execution. In the month of September, the Nazis lose 900 aircraft. By October, the fighters of the RAF rule the skies of Britain. Below them lies a litter of wrecked Nazi planes, strewn across the land they thought to conquer. Driven from the daylight skies, the Nazis turn to indiscriminate night bombing. Dropping the pretense of attacking military objectives, they visit the full terror of air attack on the ordinary people of Britain. But these people of Britain stand up to its terrors. They man their defenses, keep their vigil, and steel their minds and bodies for a protracted siege. London and Liverpool, Birmingham, Coventry and Manchester, Bristol and Plymouth, and a score of other towns, the Nazis set their fires. Docks, warehouses, churches, and private homes alike are blasted and smashed, but the firemen fight desperately to preserve their blazing cities from destruction. In every week of the air war, hundreds of civilians are killed and injured in the cities of Britain. From their suffering is born a grim resolve to fight back and keep fighting until the enemy is completely destroyed. When the smoke clears away, many a famous building has been hit. The Houses of Parliament and Westminster Abbey have felt the weight of Nazi bombs. Buckingham Palace itself has been damaged. But it takes more than Nazi bombs to turn the British people from their business. They clear away the debris and restore normal services. They are heartened by the frequent appearance of the leaders who share the same dangers and experiences with them. Turn, hearten friends from America who take back word of their bravery and determination under fire. It is no longer a lightning war. The invasion is off for the time being, but the Nazis are now masters of half a continent, holding down ruthlessly the subject peoples. Munitions and machinery and industrial plants in conquered countries from Norway to France have fallen into their hands. With them, they can outwit the British blockade, build up their forces for another attempt at invasion. The British people throw themselves with energy into the struggle. Under the leadership of men like Ernest Bevan, factory workers increase production to unheard of figures. For more and more, the people of Britain and the Dominions realize that production of war equipment is the cornerstone of victory. But harassed by constant air raids, outpaced by the myriad factories of German-occupied Europe, the people of Britain cannot hope alone to reach the production superiority vital to survival. So in December, Britain's Minister of Aircraft Production, Lord Beaverbrook, turns to his native Canada, and from this nation, skilled beyond her years in mass production, he asks still greater and swifter output. Since the very outbreak of the war, Canada has realized her vital function as a supply base for the British Commonwealth, and daily meetings of the cabinet bring first-hand reports of its urgent needs. Canada has built up her army from its peacetime strength of 50,000 to 5 or 6 times that number. She is training them in modern methods of warfare against the day when they will have to meet the disciplined and superbly equipped Nazi divisions. 3 months after the outbreak of war, she sends her 1st Division overseas, following it up at regular intervals with a 2nd and a 3rd, and preparing yet others. In England, these crack troops of the Dominion hold the traditional post of honor, the right of the line. Some guard the approaches to the heart of the empire. Others use their traditional skill as lumbermen in the forests of Scotland. Every day sees an increase in the numbers of young men training for Canada's Navy, ready to man new ships to protect the vital Atlantic highway to Britain. And under her clear skies, free as yet from the drone of enemy aircraft, she is organizing the great Commonwealth Air Training Plan. All across the country rise hangars and workshops, and gangs of men survey and level new airfields to house the swelling ranks of apprentice airmen. She rapidly mobilizes the great natural resources which have made her one of the richest countries on earth to help feed the people of Britain. She harnesses the power of her many waterways to wartime industrial production. From the oil fields of her west and her north, she draws a steadily increasing flow of the oil upon which depend the machines of modern war. Her vast forests are an unending source of timber. From the mines of the Canadian Shield, tough men hack out the ores bearing the metals so necessary to mechanized warfare. Amongst them are nickel, copper, gold, and zinc, and aluminum, because of its use in the manufacture of airplanes, the most important of all metals to a nation at war. In the factories and plants of her industrial cities, she turns out the weapons of war to equip her army and those of her allies. From the assembly lines of her great automobile plants come sturdy trucks and motor vehicles. In Ottawa, the planning of this vast organization for war calls for new ideas and new methods. Against total war, says Mr. Mackenzie King, Canada is opposing total effort. Production is centralized. Control boards regulate the supplies of vital commodities, ensure a steady flow to war needs. In the new offices of government, modern methods and efficiency are applied to the problems of war. In the United States, friendship for Britain and determination to help her in her fight grow with the realization that she will fight to the end. They show themselves in the re-election of President Roosevelt for his third term. Symbolic, too, of the new links between the United States and Britain is the presence in New York Harbor of the British battleship King George V, bringing Lord Halifax, the new British ambassador to America. As she realizes ever more clearly the threat to democracy all over the world, the United States places herself foursquare behind the British Commonwealth. She joins with Canada to make the whole North American continent a vast arsenal of democracy. She speeds up work in her own defense program, but at the same time she finds men and machines to fill more and more orders from the British Ministry of Supply. From Hudson Bay to the Gulf of Mexico, the North American continent hums with the building of engines of war. At one in their determination to aid Britain, Canada and the United States are equally determined to defend the North American continent against any Axis threat. At the Ogdensburg meeting between Mr. Mackenzie King and President Roosevelt, the two nations formally recognized that for purposes of defense, North America is one unit. That meeting sent Mayor LaGuardia of New York and his American colleagues to Ottawa to attend the first conference of the Canada-United States Joint Board on Defense. As the board meets for the first time in the summer of 1940, it sees the American continent surrounded by a world at war or under the threat of war. To the east lies the main theater of conflict, spreading over most of the continent of Europe and extending down through the Mediterranean to Egypt and North Africa. Unknown quantity is French North Africa, under the command of General Maxime Weygand, with its harbor of Dakar on the South Atlantic. This strategic port is less than 1,900 miles from the shores of South America. A danger spot, liable to flare at any moment, lies within the actual waters of the Western Hemisphere, Martinique, where the aircraft carrier Béarn has ridden at anchor since the fall of France. In the midst of this world at war lies North America. To protect its safety is the task of the board. As they continue the deliberations, the United States enjoys a strong Atlantic position through its exchange of destroyers for bases in British-held possessions. In Greenland and Iceland, before the year is out, United States troops stand guard over the North Atlantic sea lanes to the New World. To the west lies the Pacific Ocean. Around the waters of Australia lurk Nazi raiders preying on merchant ships. Northward lies Japan, partner of Germany and Italy, planning the new order in the Orient. For 3 years, her armies have ravaged China, and for 3 years, the Chinese, under Marshal Chiang Kai-shek, have fought bravely back, finding in the struggle a new unity of national purpose. Southward, too, Japan turns her eyes towards Vichy-held Indochina. Here she already holds bases and strategic rights with which someday perhaps to attack the great naval base of Singapore, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. Northward again lies the huge mass of Asiatic Russia, still in 1940, the uneasy ally of Nazi Germany. But the Defense Board knows that should Russia be drawn into active combat, the danger zone will reach the very threshold of Alaska and Canada. On the North American coast, there are naval bases at San Diego and Esquimalt, and a great military highway through interior British Columbia soon will link Alaskan territory to the United States and Canada. However the war may spread, the joint action of Canada and the United States has greatly strengthened the defenses of the Western Hemisphere. In September 1940, Mussolini launches his great invasion of Egypt. A small body of British and Dominion troops, left without French help, guards the Suez Canal and the Middle East. Against them, across the hot sands of Libya, marches the Italian army of Marshal Graziani, 250,000 strong. Within a few days, they advance 70 miles into Egypt and occupy Sidi Barrani. On the shores of the Red Sea, they force the British to leave British Somaliland. Flushed with success, Mussolini goes to the Brenner Pass. Here he awaits the arrival of Hitler in his armored train for a conference of dictators. A few days later, the Italians march into Greece. But ill-timed and badly planned, the campaign goes awry from the start. The Greek people, with a centuries-old tradition of democracy, rise valiantly against the invaders. Outnumbered by the Italians, and with far inferior equipment, they play their part so stoutly that within a few weeks they have taken the offensive and driven their enemy in confusion far into Albania. Meanwhile, the Italian fleet has proclaimed the Mediterranean a Roman sea, but the Royal Navy has other ideas, for up and down its length and breadth, British warships are on the hunt. A few of the enemy stay to fight it out, but most prefer to trust their speed rather than their gunnery. Soon, Mussolini's Italian lake is dotted with the hulks of his warships. Night raids, the ships of the Royal Navy steam almost into Italian harbors. They bombard Genoa, and at Taranto, the torpedo planes cripple half the enemy's capital ships. And so the great convoys steam proudly through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea under the watchful eyes of the Navy. Keen eyes overhead quickly spot ambushing submarines and report their presence to the ready destroyers. The powerful anti-aircraft guns of the fleet take care of hostile planes. Alexandria, Port Said, and Suez, the ships unload. Ashore come men from Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the empire, for in her own hour of greatest danger, Britain spares troops and supplies to strengthen the hard-pressed garrison guarding Egypt and the Suez Canal. In early December, General Wavell feels strong enough to attack, and taking the enemy by surprise, launches a crushing offensive. The Empire forces recapture Sidi Barrani and, using many Canadian-built trucks, pursue the fleeing Italian army across the frontier into Libya. Guns of the fleet take a hand and pound relentlessly at the coastal towns of Tobruk and Derna. By February 6th, the Army of the Nile has captured Benghazi. This force of Australians and New Zealanders, Indians and Britons destroy the Italian-Libyan army as an effective fighting unit. They take so many thousands of prisoners, they run out of places to put them. Down into the mountainous scrub of Eritrea and Italian Somaliland and Ethiopia advanced the victorious British armies. Truly had Mr. Churchill promised the Italian people to tear their African empire to shreds and tatters. In little more than 6 months, the Italians had lost almost all the empire of which they were so proud and which had taken them 70 years of bitter effort to acquire. Back to his former capital, Addis Ababa, comes Emperor Haile Selassie. And as he breaks out the royal flag of Ethiopia, the first country which the Axis conquered is the first to be free again. But the might of Germany has not been shattered, and as winter gives way to spring, the Nazi war machine begins to roll across the Danube into the Balkans. Through Romania and Bulgaria, they go without hindrance, and in spite of heroic resistance, on through Yugoslavia and Greece. As the Nazi columns press onward, Canada realizes more and more clearly the importance of her role as a producer of munitions. Prime Minister King puts the lesson of the Balkan campaign into words. Nothing could have demonstrated more clearly, he says, the vital importance in war of superior equipment. The decisive superiority of the Nazis was in striking power, in machines and weapons of war. British resistance and American help are the implacable powers over which Germany must triumph if Hitler is to impose his will on the world. This superiority of equipment carries the Nazis right through the Balkans and Crete and even back through Libya to the borders of Egypt. Canada sees clearly that the modern world belongs to the strong peoples. As she refires her energy in the second year of war, she expresses her will to be one of the powerful nations. She rushes to complete the transfer of her peacetime industry to production for war. For the first year, her plants and factories have been tooling up. Now they begin to deliver the goods. A constant stream of gun carriers, trucks, and armored vehicles rolls from her great automotive plants. Her powerful industry equips Empire forces for the war on wheels. Canada's shipyards forge ahead to build a new navy. East and west, on the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence, corvettes, minesweepers, and destroyers take shape. Over 60 Canadian corvettes have gone down the ways, and now they take their place in the gray Atlantic. From her reorganized assembly lines come the first tanks, improved Canadian models, studied and adopted by British and American military authorities. And from Quebec steel mills comes the first of many 25-pounder field guns. So Canada, mustering her own resources and organizing her industries, builds her own new tools of war. To the United States once more goes Canada's Prime Minister to confer with President Roosevelt at Hyde Park. The result of their meeting is the pooling of their country's efforts and resources in a joint economic program against the common enemy. The United States swings more of its mighty industrial machine over to production for war needs. New American ships help to replace Allied losses on the seven seas and maintain a steady flow of food and munitions to Britain. Aircraft factories design and build new types of warplanes. Bombers and fighters, ever swifter and larger, are tested for the terrific stresses of air warfare. Now the New World is solidly and effectively committed to the defeat of Nazism. And as the measure of their war production grows ever greater, the people of the United States express through their president their resolve to furnish all-out aid to the British Commonwealth and the other nations which resist aggression. Today, the supply line between the New World and Britain crosses both sea and sky. American-built bombers leave their home fields, roar northward to Canada, Newfoundland, across the North Atlantic, and a few hours later, taxi along the runways of British airports, ready for duty. Not all the planes are big enough to fly the Atlantic. All across Canada and the United States, plane parts are crated and trucked away for shipment to the front line. War supplies of every type, the joint production of two great nations working together in a common cause, pile up at the harbors. At eastern Canadian ports, 500 miles nearer Britain than those of the United States, the materials of war are swung aboard the waiting freighters. On Canadian railways, the long freights from British Columbia, from the prairies, and the industrial east travel to the Atlantic coast. Here the wealth of Canadian fields, mines, and factories is loaded into freighters for the perilous crossing to Britain. Emphasizing the vital importance of the supply lines to Britain is the dramatic meeting at sea in August 1941 between President Roosevelt and Mr. Winston Churchill. They discussed the problems of the supply of munitions of war. The freighters with their varied cargoes slip down the harbor, and the great convoys take position for the Atlantic crossing. Royal Canadian Air Force patrols shepherd the outgoing ships, setting out on their slow-paced procession past Newfoundland and the Grand Banks into the danger zones of the North Atlantic. From ports throughout the world, the raw materials and industrial output necessary to sustain a fighting Britain flow down the sea lanes in a steady stream. All the convoy routes and supply lines along which these goods must come cross the dangerous North Atlantic and converge on Britain. Nazi strategy is to starve Britain of food and munitions, and Nazi shipbuilding has one aim: to destroy shipping and cargoes. So battleships and scores of U-boats have been launched to cut the shipping lanes to British ports. From the Kiel Canal sail ships like the Bismarck, streamlined models of speed and destructive power to carry on at long range the work of Germany's speedy E-boats and destroyers. From bases along the occupied coasts of France and Norway, scores of Nazi U-boats set out to harry the ships that bring essential stocks and supplies to Britain. African convoys, Mediterranean convoys, American convoys steam into the danger zone. If a ship straggles behind its convoy, it becomes an easy prey for the surface raider or the submarine. Nearly 500,000 tons of Allied shipping, carrying precious cargo and brave men, went to the bottom in the worst month of the Battle of the Atlantic. But there are British warships, like the great King George V, patrolling the Atlantic, giving powerful protection to the ships of the merchant navy. When the Bismarck is reported at large in Western Hemisphere waters, British ships rush to engage her. In a desperate running battle clear across the Atlantic, almost to the French coast, they catch and sink the great raider at the end of her first week at sea. So gradually, at the end of the second year of war, the Allies are winning the upper hand in the Battle of the Atlantic. At last, the convoys, grimy and defiant, reach the protection of British flying boats and sight the welcome harbors of Britain. In port, at the end of the dangerous journey, they unload the materials whose continuous arrival ensures the life and strength of Britain. Now the sound of bombs is heard eastward over the deserts of Iraq. Nazi-inspired revolt imperils the oil supplies upon which the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean depends. But British mobile forces strike hard and swiftly. They capture the enemy's forts along the oil pipelines and subdue the rebellion. Led by General de Gaulle and General Wavell, the joint forces of Free France and the British Commonwealth press on through Palestine to attack Vichy-held Syria, where the Nazis are already beginning to take control. Ancient Syrian cities assume new strategic importance, for control of Syria means control of the oil supplies of the Middle East. Free French and British troops together overcome the Vichy garrison after bitter resistance and secure the eastern flank of the Mediterranean. Only a short distance northward, as distances go in this war, lie the grain fields and oil wells of the Ukraine. Their riches are invaluable to a nation at war, and upon them Germany turns greedy eyes. As the Nazis, with sudden savage fury, drive against the Soviet Union from the Black Sea to the Baltic, they confess to the world how much they fear the growing flood of supplies crossing from the New World to Britain. But in the massed millions of the Russian armies, the Nazis find an immense obstacle. This time they face a nation whose manpower is equal to their own, whose army is well equipped, whose strategists have invented many of the new military techniques of scientific war. The armored divisions rumble into battle in the Ukraine, in eastern Poland, in the Baltic states, under the command of generals like Voroshilov, Budenyi, and Timoshenko. So begins the greatest series of battles known to history, in which the largest quantities of men and machines ever to meet in conflict join battle on a front nearly 2,000 miles long. As the Russians hit hard at the Nazis from the east, the Royal Air Force begins a relentless attack on Nazi shipyards, oil refineries, communications, and heavy industry. The second year ends as it began, with a great aerial offensive. But this time, it is the Royal Air Force which pounds the targets, and the industrial cities of Germany which feel the force of hostile bombs. Bomber squadrons sweep homeward. They leave a heavy toll of wreckage and disruption in Germany's most vital spot, her industrial production and communications. While the Royal Air Force strikes at the industrial heart of Germany, Canada bends her great productive machinery to the support of the Commonwealth. And as the second year of war draws to an end, Canada is conscious of her growing might as a producer, rich in metals and food and the materials for war and peace. With new responsibilities as the hemisphere partner, she guards the approaches to the east and the approaches to the west. As her crack divisions take their stand in the front line of British defense, she shares a new partnership with Great Britain in the war for freedom. She shares, too, a new partnership with the nations of the British Commonwealth, welcoming to her shores young men of the other dominions to finish their flying training under her skies. So Canada accepts her responsibilities in this war of new skills and techniques and looks with calm courage to the future firm in the knowledge that she is realizing her destiny as one of the strong young nations of the earth.